When you look back on the Elder Scrolls games, it's hard not to see how much the series has developed. Each game has more or less been a big step up from the last, and they each have their own unique style and features that make it hard to decide which one you'd have if you could only have one. Hello everyone, I am RedBeakRaven and welcome to another Elder Scrolls 6 discussion / wishlist video where I will be talking about what features from the older Elder Scrolls games I'd like to see in the new one, and also, dare I say it, mention briefly, only briefly, only a few things I'd like for them to take from Fallout. Now I've just thought of something real quick and I'm going to start on that so I don't forget what I'm talking about, because I tend to do that more often than I think's normal. So the thought in my head right now is the Infamy and Fame system. So in Morrowind there was a reputation system where you had your general reputation and then faction reputation. In Oblivion we had the Fame and Infamy system, and in Skyrim we had, well, nothing. That's pretty much it really. I mean, you had guards that would comment on things, but yeah, that was as far as it went. Skyrim's system, whatever it was, appeared to be on a more personal level. So it's like you had a reputation with the different holds and then a reputation with each and every person you came across. That's one way of looking at it, but regardless, there was no Fame, Infamy or reputation system in Skyrim, and that is something I would like to see make a return and have more of an impact. Fallout New Vegas did it well, although I don't think it was the best system, but it had the right idea. Oblivion I thought was much better than Morrowind, mainly because it had Infamy as well as Fame, and in order to do certain things and certain quests, you had to have the required Fame level to do those. Also, your disposition with mostly every NPC in the world was increased by 3 points for every 10 points of Fame you had. Infamy naturally decreased that disposition, and if you were more infamous than famous, then you were not allowed to use altars unless you repented your sins. Having a high Infamy did very little else, but the fact that it was there was nice enough. I would like to see this again, but in a lot more depth with more meaning to the world around you. I'm thinking that they should take a look at both Oblivion's and Fallout New Vegas' system and see if they could merge them in some way and implement this in the future. I feel like the whole karma reputation system is something that still requires experimentation to get right, and I'm not just talking about in Bethesda's games. To me it seems like a lot of developers now are just scrapping the whole concept to save themselves the headache of trying to get it right, and that is understandable because it can be a really irritating feature if it's not great. But now let's move on. So this next thing is something that surprisingly I do really miss in Skyrim. And perhaps some of you would also like to see this make a return. So have you ever gone for a swim in Skyrim's rivers, lakes or sea, only to be attacked by slaughterfish and God knows what else? And in those situations, have you tried to defend yourself? Yeah, it's annoying, isn't it? I am of course talking about combat while in water. In both Morrowind and Oblivion we could use our weapons to kill anything that might be taking a swim with us. In Skyrim however, that feature was scrapped, probably because the devs thought it didn't make sense to be hacking and slashing underwater. Well, it didn't, but that doesn't mean you still can't use a blade underwater. So basically I would like to be able to use weapons underwater once again, because how am I supposed to collect scales, clams or loot underwater chests when I'm being constantly gnawed at by a bloody large yellow piranha? They could slow our attacks down or actually create underwater combat, but I wouldn't be too bothered if it was like Oblivion. Just let me kill the damn things. And speaking of combat, let's look at some of the older games weapons that I would love to see once again. One of the many things that separates Morrowind from the other Elder Scrolls games is the large arsenal of weapons it had. Honestly, the game had so many variations of weapons such as axes, battle axes, clubs, maces, warhammers, staffs, daggers, short swords, long swords, tantos, wakazashis, sabres, broadswords, katanas, you name it, it had it. Sorry to ramble on there. It seems now that in both Oblivion and Skyrim, Bethesda had taken a more traditional approach to weapons. You could argue that weapon choices were to reflect the region the game was set in. Anyways, the main point of this, as you can probably tell, is that I would like to see Morrowind's weapon variety once again in the next Elder Scrolls game. We saw the return of crossbows in Skyrim's Dawnguard DLC, but what I would like to use is a spear. How about throwing stars and even javelins? I know the combat now is a lot more sophisticated and it would take a lot more time, effort and money to implement more weapons, but I'm sure it can be done and would be greatly appreciated and loved by many fans, including me. Come on Bethesda, the money you made from Fallout 4, I'm sure there's enough for a halberd and a spear. Don't worry, we won't tell the guys upstairs, they won't even notice the money's missing. Okay, so let's move on to attributes. So if you've played any Elder Scrolls game other than Skyrim, then you likely know what attributes are, but in case you don't or can't remember, then allow me to briefly tell you. In the older games you had 8 attributes, similar to how in Fallout we have the 7 special statistics. These attributes not only raised your health, stamina and magicka, but each skill in the games had what you call a governing attribute. We'll use strength in Oblivion as an example. So strength affected the maximum weight you could carry, the damage you dealt with melee weapons and your fatigue. What governing attribute actually means is that you couldn't raise a skill, for example hand to hand, higher than its governing attribute, which was strength. You were able to increase these attributes every time you leveled up, which you could only do by training your major skills. This was one of the reasons why in Oblivion the max level you could achieve was only between 46 and 50. You could go higher though using an exploit, so despite saying all that, I'm not actually asking for this system to make a return, because I thought it was quite flawed. What I'm mainly asking for is a return of specific attribute bonuses for each different race. In the older games, your race and class as well determined your starting attributes. Now I like how attributes were scrapped in Skyrim, or rather how there were only 3, which are health, fatigue and magicka, and I wouldn't want to change that, but I would like to see more bonuses for each race, aside from the skill bonuses and the unique powers you get. So orcs, for example, start with more health as they are naturally stronger. The same or something similar could be said for Nords. The Altmer in Skyrim do start with more magicka, but why not let Bretons also start with more? Argonians or Khajiit have less health but more fatigue, and are faster when sprinting. This is all kind of like the Fallout New Vegas traits, so yeah, how about traits in the Elder Scrolls games? And something in relation to that is the birth signs. Birth signs in Skyrim were replaced by the standing stones, which I thought was a good idea, but the birth signs in previous games made sense, and I thought made your character feel a lot more unique in a way. It just made a lot more sense compared to the standing stones, but I did like having the option to change my stones, so I haven't really made my mind up about this. Maybe the traits that I just talked about could be our birth sign replacement in a way, and then they could keep the standing stones or something similar. You know what, I think I'm being a bit too picky here, so let's move on. Okay, so in my last Elder Scrolls 6 discussion / wishlist video, I talked about improving the speech skill, and then after doing that, I thought about haggling. Haggling was virtually non-existent in Skyrim, but in Oblivion and Morrowind it was a controllable aspect. I can't really say which one was a better haggling system, but the fact that we could haggle at all was brilliant. I always did like doing it whenever I could. I even battered a merchant once because they were greedy and wouldn't give me an extra 2 septims for a flawed ruby. It's not the point the ruby was flawed, or that I was also greedy. Anyways, so I'm trying to think of a much better way they could reintroduce haggling, but honestly I liked it how it used to be. So like I said, put things that once worked back in the series, and that would probably give the speech skill some more use as well. Next up is bringing back old magic. Now there are 2 things I mainly want to focus on here. 1 is teleportation and 2 is custom spells. Before I go into those, however, I'll just talk about some of the old magic and what specifically I want to see again. So in Morrowind we had levitation, which was a very useful spell to have, not only to navigate around the Telvanni wizard towers, but also to navigate dungeons and get to hard to reach areas or take shortcuts. Can you imagine how useful levitation would have been in Skyrim when exploring Dwemer ruins? I wish they would bring back levitation, because I find it hard to believe that no one else but the Dunmer practiced this type of magic, and I say the same for walking on water. In vanilla Skyrim there was no spell or alchemy effect that enabled you to do this, whereas in both Morrowind and Oblivion you could. Personally I can't say that I used it often, but I would still like to be able to use it, and it makes no sense that it's one of those pieces of magic that is suddenly not in use. I think one of the problems people have with all these different and useful magic effects being removed is that they were some of the best spells, specifically in Morrowind. I can see why levitation was removed because of the cities in Oblivion and Skyrim having their own worlds, but water walking, I don't see why not. Mark and Recall I believe was removed because there are certain dungeons that require you to progress through to the end, and teleporting out of there would probably break the scripting. Now I know some of you might be dying to point out the Levitation Act that was passed throughout the Empire in 3E421, with Morrowind being the exception of course, but let's not forget that there are other magic practices that are technically banned, but yet we are still able to partake in. Although is necromancy worse than levitation in the eyes of the Empire? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. Teleportation as well is a bit of a grey area. We know it was probably removed due to us being able to fast travel, but again it seems like it just disappeared without a solid explanation. I suppose it could be a case of only the most powerful mages can carry out basic teleportation, but when you have it all over the place in Morrowind, it's kind of hard to brush that under the mat and say it now takes even more skill to do so. I would like to see levitation, walk on water effects and teleportation make a return, but I would mainly love to see the return of custom spells. In both Morrowind and Oblivion, we should have a drinking game for how many times I've said that. We could create our own spells. I love the concept, but honestly I never really dabbled in magic when playing both of those games. I did put a bit more time into it in Skyrim, but I'm more of a sword and bow person. If the next Elder Scrolls put all of this in and tweaked the way that combat with magic worked, then maybe I would be inclined to use it more. I wasn't a fan of having to keep equipping spells in my hands in Skyrim, nor was I a fan of how it worked in Morrowind and Oblivion. So perhaps some more experimentation could be the thing it needs, in my opinion anyways. So that actually covers 3 of my bullet points. Now let's move on to a couple of quickish things and then I'll talk about the final aspect I want to see make a return. So you know when I said I was going to talk about Fallout things, well there's only one thing that I wanted to mention, seeing as though I did make a video on what I would like the Elder Scrolls to take from Fallout. I did forget to mention this though, and I thought this would be a perfect time to bring it up. So how about weapon customization? You ever fancied a gilded sword or a hilt full of markings and other nice battle-torn looking things? How about a blade with writing on, or tribal marks if you're into that? I think that there is a place for both weapon and armor customization in the Elder Scrolls, and they could take inspiration from Ubisoft's For Honor game. And while on the subject of weapons and magic, something that I felt was either completely forgot about or was just removed but made sense when it was a feature is the requirement of either magic, a silver or enchanted weapon to kill ghosts and spirits. In Oblivion, oh god I've said it again, in order to actually harm and eventually kill a ghost you needed to either use magic, a silver weapon or an enchanted weapon. Anything else would just go right through them. I thought this added a nice touch to fighting ghosts, and yet again, as I think I've said many times now, makes sense. And no, I don't believe everything has to make sense in both video games and real life. But yeah, the whole idea of needing a certain weapon to kill things is brilliant. I like it. It requires you to think more about adventuring. And what if the same could be said for other creatures? What if it wasn't just weaknesses but requirements to kill? For example, fire could only kill Spriggans, blunt weapons or magic can only kill Dwemer creations, or flame atronachs can only be destroyed with ice magic. It could really make fights a lot more interesting and would definitely encourage us to change our tactics in combat. There's potential there, and I do hope they at least try something along those lines. Anyways, now it's time for the last thing that I want to talk about, and it's something that Morrowind players will most likely relate to. What I'm talking about, and I don't mean to drag out the introduction to this feature, which I realise now that I am, unintentionally, I apologise for that. Really, I do. I don't mean to drag this out. Well, maybe I do. Just a little bit. Alright, I'm talking about faction rank gates. There you go, there's your answer. Thank you for listening. Good night. No, in all seriousness, what this refers to, for those who don't know, is the requirements your character needed in order to advance further up the chain of command within your faction. In Morrowind, you didn't just complete quests in order to get a promotion, but you actually had to have certain skill requirements, as well as, and also I nearly forgot this, you needed to have a certain reputation level with that faction. Let's take the Imperial Legion for example. So you can start out in the Legion as a recruit. In order to advance to the next rank, you need to have one of the Legion's favoured skills at level 10 and a reputation level of 5. In order to increase your reputation, you needed to complete quests. As time went on and you advanced in the ranks, the requirements would become much higher. To obtain the rank of Knight Protector, for example, you needed endurance and personality at level 33, one of the favoured skills at level 70 and 2 of them at level 25, plus a reputation of 70. This was such an excellent system, as I felt like you had to actually put time and effort into becoming a rank higher within a faction, so you had to essentially work for your rank instead of being given it within a matter of minutes of completing a couple of quests. I would like to see this system return, but maybe slightly more in depth and improved. I just never liked how quickly I was able to advance through the ranks of a faction in Oblivion and Skyrim. You could become the Archmage of the College of Winterhold and still be crap at magic. Also, some factions in Morrowind had grudges between others, and you weren't at times able to join one faction if you were with an enemy faction. Would be interesting to see more conflicts between joinable factions, and conflicts that don't always end up with one killing the other. But now I'm going to ask all you lovely people what your thoughts are on all that I've discussed. What do you agree or disagree with? Is there anything else from the older Elder Scrolls that you would like to see in the next one? Let me know what you're thinking down below, and I'll definitely take a look at what you have to say. So hit the like button if you like this video. You can also follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook. You'll find the links at the bottom of the description. Anyways, that's all from me, so until next time, I'll see you soon.